I was about to sign my company over to my son. My DIL handed me a coffee with a smile. The maid accidentally bumped into me and whispered, "Don't drink, just trust me." I secretly swapped cups with my DIL. 5 minutes later, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Evelyn Whitmore, and at 64 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come, disguised as a family meeting on a Tuesday morning in October, served with a smile and a cup of coffee that was meant to be my last. I had been running Whitmore Industries for 15 years, ever since my husband Charles passed away from a heart attack. It wasn't easy stepping into his shoes, but I managed to grow our small manufacturing company into something worth $12 million. Not bad for a widow who had spent most of her marriage organizing charity events and hosting dinner parties. Carlton, my 39-year-old son, had been working at the company for the past 5 years. I won't lie and say he was exceptional, but he was family, and I believed that meant something. His wife Ever had joined us 2 years ago as marketing director. She was efficient, charming when she needed to be, and had a way of making everyone feel like her best friend, including me. That Tuesday morning, Carlton called and asked if we could have a family meeting at the house. "Mom, we need to discuss some important changes about the company's future," he said, his voice carrying that tone he used when he thought he was being serious and responsible. "Ever, and I have been thinking about succession planning, and we want to make sure we're all on the same page." I agreed, of course. At my age, it made sense to start thinking about who would take over when I decided to retire. I assumed we would discuss timelines, his readiness to take on more responsibility, maybe some training programs. I was naive. The meeting was set for 10 in the morning at my house in Beacon Hill. I had lived there for over 30 years, and it still felt like Charles might walk through the front door at any moment. The living room where we planned to meet had been his favorite spot, with its dark wood paneling, stone fireplace, and the wall of family photographs that chronicled happier times. I woke up early that morning, as I always did, and went through my usual routine. Coffee first, always coffee. I had been drinking the same blend for decades, a rich Colombian roast that Charles had introduced me to during our honeymoon. Rosa, our housekeeper, had been with us for 20 years and knew exactly how I liked it prepared. Rosa was in her early 50s, quiet and efficient. With graying hair she kept pulled back in a neat bun. She had started working for us when Carlton was still in college, and she had watched him grow from a somewhat irresponsible young man into what I hoped was a mature adult. Though lately I had noticed she seemed nervous around him and Ever, always finding excuses to leave the room when they visited. As I waited for Carlton and Ever to arrive, I sat in the living room reviewing some quarterly reports. The company had been doing well, better than well actually. We had landed 3 major contracts in the past 6 months, and our profit margins were the highest they had been in years. I felt proud of what we had built, what Charles and I had started together, and what I had managed to sustain and grow after his death. Carlton arrived first, at exactly 10 o'clock, dressed in one of his expensive suits that I suspected cost more than Rosa made in a month. He had always been particular about his appearance, inheriting his father's tall frame and dark hair, though without Charles's warmth in his eyes. "Good morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek in that perfunctory way that had replaced the genuine affection of his childhood. "Ever should be here any minute. She stopped to pick up those pastries you like from the bakery downtown." "That was thoughtful of her," I replied, though I wondered why she felt the need to bring food to a business meeting. We weren't planning a social gathering. Ever arrived 15 minutes later, looking as polished as always in a cream-colored blazer and navy skirt, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves. She carried a small white box tied with ribbon and an insulated coffee carrier with 3 cups. "Evelyn, darling," she said, setting the items down on the coffee table and giving me a hug that felt just a little too tight and lasted just a little too long. "I brought some fresh coffee from that new place on Newberry Street. I know how much you love trying new blends." I found it odd that she would bring outside coffee when she knew Rosa had already prepared my usual morning pot, but I smiled and thanked her. Ever had always been attentive in ways that seemed thoughtful, but somehow left me feeling slightly uncomfortable, as if I were being managed rather than cared for. "This is wonderful," I said, accepting the cup she handed me. The coffee was in my favorite blue porcelain cup, one from a set that had belonged to my mother. Ever knew I preferred it to the everyday mugs. "You're always so considerate." Carlton settled into the armchair across from me, while Ever took the spot on the sofa nearest to my chair. She had positioned herself so she could see both Carlton and me, and I noticed her eyes flicking between us as if she were monitoring our reactions to something. "So," I began, taking a sip of the coffee Ever had brought. It tasted different from my usual blend, slightly bitter with an aftertaste I couldn't quite identify. "You mentioned wanting to discuss succession planning." Carlton leaned forward, his hands clasped together in front of him. "Yes, Mom. Ever and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to start stepping back from the day-to-day operations. You've worked so hard for so long, and you deserve to enjoy your retirement." The way he said it made it sound like I was already too old to be effective, which stung more than I cared to admit. "I appreciate your concern, but I still feel quite capable of running the company. The numbers certainly suggest I'm doing something right." "Of course you are," Ever interjected smoothly, her voice warm and reassuring. "You've built something incredible. But Carlton and I want to make sure that legacy is protected and continued. We've been developing some ideas for expansion, new markets we could explore." As she spoke, I noticed Rosa moving around in the background, dusting furniture that didn't need dusting, straightening pictures that were already straight. She seemed agitated, more restless than usual. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something in her expression that looked almost like fear. "What kind of expansion?" I asked, taking another sip of the coffee. The bitter taste was becoming more pronounced, and I wondered if they had chosen a particularly strong roast. Carlton began outlining their plans, speaking quickly and enthusiastically about international markets and manufacturing partnerships. As he talked, I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest, and my head began to feel slightly light. I attributed it to the strength of the coffee and tried to focus on what he was saying. Ever was watching me intently, and when our eyes met, she smiled that perfect smile she always wore. But there was something behind it, something I had never noticed before. It wasn't warmth or affection, it was anticipation. "The thing is, Mom," Carlton continued, "we would need you to sign some paperwork today to get the process started. Transfer of authority forms, updated partnership agreements, that sort of thing." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "I know it seems like a lot, but our lawyers have reviewed everything. It's really just a formality to begin the transition." I reached for the papers, but my hand felt strangely heavy. The warmth in my chest was spreading, and I was starting to feel dizzy. "I think I need to review these more carefully before signing anything," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Of course," Ever said quickly, standing up. "But maybe you should finish your coffee first. You look a little pale." That's when Rosa appeared beside my chair, carrying a tray of clean silverware that she clearly didn't need to be handling at that moment. As she leaned over to set the tray on the side table, she stumbled, catching herself against my arm. The movement caused my coffee cup to tip, and the remaining liquid spilled across my lap and onto the floor. "Oh no, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry," Rosa exclaimed, her voice carrying more emotion than a simple accident warranted. As she knelt to clean up the spill, she looked directly into my eyes and whispered, so quietly that only I could hear, "Don't drink any more of that. Just trust me." The urgency in her voice sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the spilled coffee. In 20 years, Rosa had never been anything but calm and professional. The fear in her eyes was real, and it made my blood run cold. Rosa? How could you be so clumsy? Ever snapped, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment. That was a complete set. You know how much Mrs. Whitmore values those cups. It's quite all right, I said, my mind racing despite the strange lethargy that was settling over my body. Rosa's warning had triggered every instinct I had learned in decades of business dealing with people who didn't always have my best interests at heart. Accidents happen. Ever immediately moved to pour coffee from her own cup into mine. Here, let me share mine with you. You've barely had any, and you know how you get when you don't have your morning coffee. But as she lifted her cup to pour, Rosa stumbled again, this time bumping directly into Ever's arm. Ever's coffee splashed everywhere, drenching the legal documents Carlton had spread on the table. "Rosa!" Carlton shouted, jumping to his feet. "What the hell is wrong with you today?" "I'm so sorry, Mr. Carlton," Rosa stammered. But as she looked at me, I saw something different in her expression. Relief. In the confusion of cleaning up the second spill, I noticed that Ever had gone very quiet. She was staring at the coffee stains on the papers with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she looked up and saw me watching her, she forced another smile. "Well, this is quite a mess," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. "Maybe we should postpone this meeting until we can get new copies of the documents." "Actually," I said, my mind becoming clearer despite my physical discomfort, "I think I'd like to see those papers now, coffee stains and all." As I reached for the documents, I watched Ever carefully. There was something in her reaction, a tension that hadn't been there before Rosa's accidents. She seemed almost disappointed that we weren't rescheduling. "Of course," Carlton said, but I could hear the reluctance in his voice. Though they're a bit difficult to read now. As I began to scan the documents, my vision blurring slightly from whatever was making me feel so strange, I noticed that Rosa was still in the room, pretending to organize items on the bookshelf, but clearly listening to every word. Then, Ever reached for the coffee pot to refill her cup, and something extraordinary happened. Her hand was shaking so badly that she could barely hold it steady. This was a woman who never showed even the slightest sign of nervousness, who could handle high-pressure business meetings without breaking a sweat. "Ever, are you feeling all right?" I asked, genuinely concerned despite my growing suspicions. "Oh, I'm fine," she said quickly, setting the pot down without pouring any coffee. "Just a little tired." But as I watched her, I noticed that her face was becoming flushed, and she seemed to be having trouble focusing her eyes. She sat down heavily on the sofa, one hand pressed to her forehead. "I think I might need to lie down for a moment," she said, her voice sounding weak and distant. Carlton immediately moved to her side, all concern and attention. "Honey, what's wrong? Should I call a doctor?" Ever tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She collapsed back onto the sofa, her skin now pale and damp with perspiration. "I feel so strange," she whispered. "Like everything is spinning." That's when Rosa stepped forward, and I saw something in her eyes that told me she knew exactly what was happening. "Mrs. Ever," she said, her voice steady now, "when did you last eat something today?" "I had breakfast," Ever replied, but her words were slurring slightly. "I feel so dizzy." Suddenly, her body went rigid, and then she began to convulse. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical like you see in movies. It was terrifying and real, her body jerking uncontrollably while Carlton held her and shouted her name. "Call 911, I managed to say, though my own voice sounded strange to my ears. As Carlton frantically dialed for an ambulance, I looked at Rosa, who was standing perfectly still, watching the scene unfold with an expression of grim satisfaction rather than shock. And in that moment, as the sirens began wailing in the distance and Ever's body continued to shake with whatever was coursing through her system, I realized that the coffee I had been drinking, the coffee that Rosa had deliberately spilled, had been meant for me. The woman lying there convulsing on my sofa had just been poisoned by her own weapon. The ambulance ride to Boston General Hospital felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably no more than 15 minutes. I sat beside Carlton in the back, watching the paramedics work on Ever as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Her face was the color of ash, and despite the oxygen mask covering half her face, her breathing remained shallow and labored. Carlton held her hand and kept repeating, "You're going to be okay, baby. You're going to be fine." But I noticed something that chilled me more than Ever's condition. His voice lacked genuine panic. It carried concern, yes, but it sounded more like an actor delivering lines than a husband watching his wife fight for her life. I kept thinking about Rosa's warning and the deliberate way she had spilled that coffee. 20 years of working together, and Rosa had never been clumsy. Never. She dusted priceless antiques, handled delicate china, and moved through our house with the precision of someone who understood the value of everything she touched. At the hospital, Ever was rushed into the emergency room while Carlton and I were directed to a waiting area that smelled of disinfectant and fear. The fluorescent lights were too bright, casting everything in harsh shadows that made Carlton's face look gaunt and strange. "I should call her parents," Carlton said, pacing back and forth across the small space. "They'll want to know what happened." "What are you going to tell them?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. He stopped pacing and turned to look at me. "The truth, that she collapsed at home and we don't know why." But that wasn't the complete truth, was it? The complete truth was that Ever had collapsed after drinking coffee that was supposed to be mine. Coffee that Rosa had deliberately prevented me from finishing. The complete truth was that my son's wife might be dying from poison that had been intended for me. A doctor appeared about an hour later. A tired-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes and grave expression. "Are you the family of Ever Whitmore?" "I'm her husband," Carlton said immediately. "This is my mother. How is she?" "She's stable, but we're running extensive blood tests. Her symptoms suggest some kind of toxic ingestion. Can you think of anything unusual she might have consumed today? Any medications, supplements, cleaning products?" Carlton shook his head quickly. "Nothing out of the ordinary. We were just having coffee and discussing business when she suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed." The doctor made notes on her chart. "What about the coffee? Where did it come from?" "Ever brought it from a new place on Newberry Street," Carlton replied. "But my mother and I had the same coffee, and we're fine." Except that wasn't true either. I had barely drunk any of mine before Rosa spilled it, and what little I had consumed had made me feel dizzy and disoriented. The effects had worn off during the ambulance ride, leaving me with a clear head and a growing certainty that someone had tried to kill me. "We'll need to test any remaining coffee or food from your meeting," the doctor continued. "The police will want to investigate if this turns out to be intentional poisoning." I saw Carlton's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Of course, whatever you need." After the doctor left, Carlton immediately pulled out his phone. "I need to call Rosa and have her clean up the mess from this morning before the police get there." "Actually," I said quietly, "I think we should leave everything exactly as it is." He looked at me sharply. "Why would we do that?" "Because if someone tried to poison Ever, the evidence might help them figure out who did it." Carlton stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face. Calculation. "You think someone deliberately poisoned her?" "I think we shouldn't make any assumptions until we know more." But I had already made my assumption, and it was becoming more solid with every passing minute. Someone had tried to poison me, and Ever had drunk it instead. The question was whether Carlton had been part of the plan or if he was as innocent as he was pretending to be. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I instead walked outside and called Rosa. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Mrs. Whitmore? How is Mrs. Ever?" "She's alive, Rosa. No thanks to the coffee she brought this morning." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Rosa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to know something, Mrs. Whitmore. Things I've been seeing, things I should have told you about sooner." "What kinds of things?" "Can you meet me somewhere private?" "Not at the house." Mr. Carlton said he was going to fire me for being clumsy today, and I don't think it's safe for either of us to talk where he might hear. My heart was pounding now. Where? There's a small cafe called Marley's on Commonwealth Avenue, about 6 blocks from the hospital. I can be there in 20 minutes. Rosa, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that Mrs. Ever has been putting something in your morning coffee for weeks, and I finally couldn't watch it anymore. I'm saying that I've been keeping track of everything, and you're in more danger than you know. The line went dead, leaving me standing on a busy sidewalk with my entire world tilting on its axis. For weeks, Ever had been poisoning me. Slowly, carefully, methodically. And today was supposed to have been the final dose. I walked back into the hospital in a daze, my mind racing with implications I didn't want to consider. When I reached the waiting area, Carlton was on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. No, it all went wrong, he was saying. She's in the hospital now and the police are going to investigate. He saw me approaching and quickly ended the call. That was work, he said smoothly. I had to cancel my afternoon meetings. But I had heard enough to know that whoever he was talking to, it wasn't anyone from the office. Carlton had been expecting something to go wrong. He had been prepared for police involvement. Carlton, I said, sitting down beside him, I need you to be completely honest with me about something. He turned to face me, and for a moment, his mask slipped. I saw fear in his eyes, but also something else. Resentment. What do you want to know, Mom? How long have you been planning to take over the company? What do you mean? I mean, how long have you been waiting for me to die so you could inherit everything? The question hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Carlton's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, hurt, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. I would never want anything to happen to you, Mom. You know that. But he had answered too quickly, and his voice carried that same artificial quality I had noticed in the ambulance. It was the voice of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. I'm going to step outside for some air, I said, standing up. Will you call me if there's any news about Ever? Of course. As I walked away, I heard him make another phone call. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost panicked. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Rosa in a small, dimly lit cafe that smelled of cinnamon and old coffee. Rosa looked older than her 52 years, her face drawn with worry and what looked like guilt. I should have told you sooner, she said without preamble, but I wasn't sure at first, and then I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Tell me now. Rosa pulled a small notebook from her purse and placed it on the table between us. I started writing things down about 3 months ago, when I first noticed Mrs. Ever doing something strange. She opened the notebook to reveal pages of neat handwriting, dates and times, and detailed observations. Every morning, you drink your coffee in the living room while you read the newspaper, Rosa continued. For 20 years, I've prepared that coffee the same way, in the same cup, and brought it to you on the same tray. But 3 months ago, Mrs. Ever started arriving early on the mornings when you had business meetings. I remembered those early visits. Ever would arrive before 9, claiming she wanted to help prepare for whatever meeting we had scheduled. She would often take over the coffee service, insisting that Rosa had enough to do. At first, I thought she was just being helpful, Rosa continued, flipping through the pages. But then I noticed that you started feeling sick on those mornings. Dizzy, nauseous, weak. You said it was just stress from work, but it only happened when Mrs. Ever had handled your coffee. She showed me a page covered with dates and symptoms. 3 months of careful observation, recorded in Rosa's precise handwriting. So, I started watching her more closely. One morning about 6 weeks ago, I pretended to be busy in the pantry, but I could see into the kitchen through the service window. Mrs. Ever had a small vial of clear liquid, and she put several drops into your coffee before stirring it. My stomach turned. 6 weeks of systematic poisoning. Why didn't you tell me then? Because I was afraid, Rosa admitted, tears starting to form in her eyes. Mr. Carlton had already threatened to fire me twice for asking too many questions about the business. He said I was getting too nosy for a housekeeper. I was afraid that if I accused his wife of poisoning you without proof, he would not only fire me but make sure I could never work anywhere else. So you started keeping records. I started keeping records, and I started taking pictures. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photos. Ever in the kitchen, reaching into her purse. Ever standing over my coffee cup with something in her hand. Ever stirring the cup with an expression of cold concentration. This morning, Rosa continued, I saw her put more drops than usual into your coffee. Much more. And I heard her on the phone earlier, talking to Mr. Carlton about how everything would be finished today. I knew that whatever she was planning, it was going to be worse than making you feel sick. So you made sure I didn't drink it. I couldn't let her kill you, Mrs. Whitmore. You've been good to me for 20 years. You helped me when my daughter was sick. You paid for her surgery when I couldn't afford it. You treated me like family when my own family was thousands of miles away. I reached across the table and took Rosa's hand. You saved my life. But Mrs. Ever is alive, and she's going to face the consequences of what she tried to do to me. Rosa squeezed my hand. There's more, Mrs. Whitmore. Things I found out about Mr. Carlton. She flipped to another section of her notebook. He's been meeting with lawyers about changing your will. He's taken out life insurance policies on you that you don't know about. And he's been moving money from the business accounts into accounts that only he can access. The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. Carlton wasn't just waiting for me to die naturally. He had been actively planning my murder while stealing from the company that would eventually be his inheritance anyway. How much money has he moved? Rosa consulted her notes. From what I could see on the papers he left in the study, at least $200,000 over the past 6 months. Maybe more. $200,000. Enough to hire professional help, to cover up evidence, to buy silence. Enough to fund a systematic murder plot. Rosa, I need you to do something for me. I need you to gather all of your evidence and take it directly to the police. Don't go home first. Don't call anyone. Just go straight to the station. What about you? I'm going back to the hospital to wait for the test results. If they confirm that Ever was poisoned, it's going to create a lot of questions that Carlton won't be able to answer. As we stood to leave, Rosa grabbed my arm. Mrs. Whitmore, please be careful. If Mr. Carlton realizes that you know what they were planning. He won't hurt me in a hospital full of witnesses. But Rosa, after you talk to the police, don't go home. Stay somewhere safe until this is resolved. I walked back to Boston General with my mind clearer than it had been in months. The dizziness and confusion I had been experiencing weren't symptoms of aging or stress. They were symptoms of gradual arsenic poisoning, designed to weaken me before the final, fatal dose. When I returned to the waiting area, Carlton was sitting exactly where I had left him. But now he was accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who looked like a lawyer. Mom, this is David Richardson, Carlton said, standing when he saw me. He's our family attorney. I thought we should have legal representation given what happened to Ever. David Richardson extended his hand with a practiced smile. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Carlton called me because he's concerned that someone might try to blame your family for what happened to Ever. Why would anyone blame us? I asked, genuinely curious to hear how they plan to handle this. Well, David said carefully, if the police determine that Ever was intentionally poisoned, they're going to look at everyone who had access to what she consumed. Since it happened at your house, during a family meeting, you could all potentially be considered suspects. It was a clever preemptive move. By bringing in a lawyer immediately, Carlton was setting up a narrative where his family was being unfairly targeted by an investigation, rather than being the perpetrators of attempted murder. That makes sense, I said neutrally. I suppose we should all be prepared to answer their questions honestly. Carlton and David exchanged a quick glance that told me they had already prepared their version of honest answers. That's when Dr. Martinez returned, her expression even more serious than before. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, I need to speak with you about the test results." We followed her to a small consultation room that felt more like an interrogation chamber than a place for medical discussions. "Your wife has been poisoned with arsenic," Dr. Martinez said without preamble. "A significant dose that would have been fatal if she hadn't received immediate medical attention. The police have been notified, and they'll want to interview everyone who was present when she consumed whatever contained the poison." Carlton's face went white, but his voice remained steady. "Arsenic? How is that possible?" "That's what the police investigation will determine. In the meantime, Mrs. Whitmore will need to be monitored closely. Arsenic poisoning can have lasting effects, and we want to make sure she receives the proper treatment." "Will she recover?" I asked. "With treatment, yes. She was very fortunate that whatever she consumed was discovered and treated so quickly." Fortunate. If ever only knew how fortunate she was that Rosa had saved both our lives with a clumsy stumble and a whispered warning. As we left the consultation room, Carlton immediately turned to David. "What do we do now?" But David was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have any idea how arsenic could have gotten into something your daughter-in-law consumed?" It was a test, I realized. They wanted to know how much I suspected, how much Rosa might have told me, whether I was going to be a problem for their carefully constructed story. "I have no idea," I said calmly, "but I'm sure the police investigation will uncover the truth." And it would. Rosa was probably talking to detectives right now, showing them photographs and evidence that would unravel whatever lies Carlton and his lawyer had prepared. Carlton's phone rang, and he stepped away to answer it. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw his face change from worried to panicked to furious in the span of seconds. When he hung up, he turned to David with wild eyes. "We have a problem. The police just arrested Rosa for attempted murder." David nodded grimly. "I expected they might try to pin this on the help. It's the most obvious suspect when poison is involved. Mike. But I knew better. Rosa hadn't been arrested for attempted murder because she was a convenient scapegoat. She had been arrested because Carlton had found out that she had talked to the police, and he was trying to eliminate the only witness who could prove whatever and he had been planning. The difference was, Rosa had been smart enough to make copies of everything, and soon, very soon, Carlton was going to realize that his perfect murder plot had turned into the evidence that would destroy him. The police station felt like stepping into another world, one where the comfortable lies I had been living with for months were stripped away under harsh fluorescent lights. Detective Sarah Chen was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of patience that came from years of listening to people lie to her face. I had driven there directly from the hospital, leaving Carlton with his lawyer to handle whatever damage control they thought necessary. What they didn't know was that I had already spoken to Rosa's public defender and arranged for my own attorney to represent her. If my son thought he could frame the woman who had saved my life, he was about to learn how wrong he could be. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Chen said as she led me into a small interview room, "thank you for coming in voluntarily. I know this must be a difficult time for your family. Detective, before we begin, I need you to know that Rosa Martinez is innocent of attempting to murder my daughter-in-law. In fact, she saved both our lives this morning." Detective Chen raised an eyebrow and opened a thick file folder. "That's an interesting perspective. Can you tell me why you believe that?" I spent the next hour walking through everything that had happened, from the strange coffee Ever had brought to Rosa's deliberate clumsiness, to the warning she had whispered in my ear. When I finished, Detective Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Whitmore, what you're describing suggests that someone was trying to poison you and that your daughter-in-law accidentally consumed the poison intended for you. That's exactly what I'm describing. And you believe your son knew about this plan?" The words hung in the air like an accusation that once spoken couldn't be taken back. I believe my son has been planning my death for months, possibly longer. Detective Chen made notes on her pad. We've already spoken with Rosa Martinez. Her story matches yours exactly, and she's provided us with extensive documentation of suspicious behavior she observed over the past 3 months. What kind of documentation? Photographs, detailed notes, even recordings she made of conversations between your son and his wife. Mrs. Whitmore, if what Rosa documented is accurate, you've been the victim of attempted murder for quite some time. My hands began to shake, and I gripped them together in my lap. Hearing it stated so matter-of-factly made it real in a way that my own suspicions hadn't. For months, Carlton and Ever had been slowly poisoning me while I trusted them, included them in my business decisions, and treated them like the family I thought they were. There's something else, Detective Chen continued. We obtained a warrant to search your son's house and office. We found several concerning items. She opened another folder and spread several photographs across the table. Multiple life insurance policies on you, totaling $5 million, all taken out within the past year. Bank records showing regular transfers from your business accounts into personal accounts controlled solely by your son. And this. She handed me a plastic evidence bag containing a small glass vial with a dropper top. We found this hidden in your daughter-in-law's desk at work. The lab confirmed it contains a concentrated arsenic solution. I stared at the vial, this tiny container that had been meant to end my life drop by drop. How long would it have taken? Based on the dosage Rosa documented in her observations, probably another 2 to 3 weeks. The symptoms you were experiencing, the weakness and confusion, those were signs that the arsenic was building up in your system. The amount they put in your coffee this morning would have been the final dose. The room felt cold, despite the building's overheated air. What happens now? We arrest your son and formally charge your daughter-in-law with attempted murder and conspiracy. With Rosa's evidence and what we found in the searches, we have more than enough for prosecution. Detective Chen leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, I have to ask, how are you feeling about this? Discovering that your own son was planning to kill you can't be easy to process. The question caught me off guard, because I realized I hadn't allowed myself to feel anything yet. I had been focused on facts, evidence, and legal procedures. But underneath all of that was a grief so profound I wasn't sure I could survive it. I keep thinking about when he was little, I said quietly. Carlton was such a sweet child. He would bring me flowers from the garden and tell me I was the most beautiful mother in the world. When his father died, he held my hand at the funeral and promised he would always take care of me. My voice cracked on the last words. I don't know when that little boy became someone who could look me in the eye while planning my murder. I don't know when I stopped being his mother and became just an obstacle to his inheritance. Detective Chen nodded sympathetically. People change, Mrs. Whitmore. Sometimes greed and entitlement can override every other emotion, including love. What your son did doesn't reflect on you as a mother or diminish the love you gave him. But it did diminish something. It diminished my faith in my own judgment, my ability to trust, my sense of security in the world. How do you rebuild your life when the foundation you built it on turns out to have been rotten from the beginning? We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial, Detective Chen continued. Your testimony about Rosa's warning and your son's behavior will be crucial. Of course, whatever you need. As I prepared to leave the police station, Detective Chen handed me her card. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd recommend staying somewhere other than your house for the next few days. We'll need to process it as a crime scene. And frankly, I'm not sure it's safe for you there until we have your son in custody. I nodded, but the truth was, I never wanted to set foot in that house again. Every room would be contaminated with the knowledge of what had happened there, every corner hiding the memory of betrayal. I drove to the Four Seasons downtown and checked into a suite, paying for a week in advance. I needed time to think, to plan. to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been systematically dismantled by the people I loved most. The hotel room was elegant and anonymous, decorated in neutral tones that demanded nothing from me emotionally. I ordered room service and sat by the window looking out at the city below, watching people go about their normal lives while mine fell apart and reformed into something entirely different. My phone rang constantly throughout the evening. Carlton's number appeared over and over again, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, to listen to whatever explanations or justifications he might offer. There could be no explanation that would make this acceptable, no justification that would restore my trust in him. Finally, around 9 o'clock, I answered one of his calls. "Mom, thank God," Carlton's voice was frantic, high-pitched with panic. "Where are you?" "The police came to the house with a warrant. They're searching everything, taking papers, asking neighbors about Ever and me. I'm somewhere safe." "Mom, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. That crazy woman Rosa has filled your head with lies. Ever would never hurt you. We love you." Carlton stopped talking. The firmness in my voice seemed to surprise him. For a moment, there was silence on the line. "I know what you did," I said quietly. "I know about the life insurance policies, the money you stole from the company, the arsenic Ever was putting in my coffee. I know all of it." Another silence, longer this time. When Carlton spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the frantic son pleading for understanding. What remained was cold and calculating. "You can't prove anything, Mom. It's your word against ours, and Ever is the one in the hospital. If anyone looks guilty here, it's you." "Is that really how you want to play this? You want to accuse your own mother of trying to poison your wife?" "I want to protect my family from false accusations. Rosa was fired for theft last year. Did you know that? She has every reason to want revenge against us." But I knew that was a lie. Rosa had never been fired, never been accused of theft. Carlton was making up stories as he went along, trying to muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. "Carlton, I've already spoken to the police. I've told them everything." "Then you've made a terrible mistake, Mom, a mistake that's going to destroy this family." "This family was destroyed the moment you and Ever decided I was worth more to you dead than alive." I hung up before he could respond, but the phone rang again immediately. This time, I turned it off completely. The next morning, I woke to a knock at my hotel room door. Through the peephole, I saw Detective Chen holding a newspaper. "I thought you should see this before you hear about it from someone else," she said, handing me the Boston Herald. The headline read, "Local businessman arrested in wife poisoning plot." Below it was a photograph of Carlton being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "We arrested him at his house around 6 this morning," Detective Chen explained. "He's been charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, embezzlement, and insurance fraud." "What about Ever?" "She's still in the hospital, but she's been formally charged as well. Her lawyer is already talking about a plea deal." I set the newspaper down without reading the article. Seeing Carlton's picture on the front page, seeing him reduced to a criminal defendant, should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like the final death of something I hadn't even realized I was still hoping for. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something else. Rosa Martinez was released this morning. All charges against her have been dropped, and the district attorney's office has issued a public apology for her arrest." "Is she all right?" "She's shaken up, but she's tough. She wanted me to give you this." Detective Chen handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Rosa's careful handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Mrs. Whitmore, I am so sorry for everything you are going through. You have always been kind to me, and I am grateful I could protect you when you needed it. I will understand if you don't want me to work for you anymore after all this. But please know that you have my loyalty always. Rosa." I folded the note carefully and put it in my purse. In 20 years, Rosa had never asked for anything except the chance to do her job well and provide for her family. She had risked everything to save my life, and I was going to make sure she knew how much that meant to me. Detective Chen, what happens next? There will be a grand jury hearing, then a trial. With the evidence we have, the district attorney is confident of conviction on all charges. Your son is looking at potentially 25 years to life, depending on whether he accepts a plea deal. 25 years to life. Carlton would be in his 60s when he got out of prison, if he got out at all. The little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the garden would spend the rest of his youth behind bars. Mrs. Whitmore, I know this is difficult, but you should also know that your son has hired one of the best defense attorneys in the state. Jonathan Blackwood doesn't take cases unless he thinks he can win them. What are you saying? I'm saying that Carlton isn't going down without a fight. Blackwood is going to argue that Ever was the mastermind, that your son was manipulated by his wife into going along with her plan. He's going to paint Carlton as another victim. The idea that Carlton would try to blame everything on Ever while she lay in a hospital bed recovering from poison that was meant for me was so reprehensible that it took my breath away. Can he do that? Can he really claim he was just following his wife's lead? He can try. Whether a jury believes him is another matter. That's why your testimony is so crucial. You knew Carlton his entire life. You can speak to his character, his relationship with money, his feelings about the business succession. As Detective Chen prepared to leave, she handed me another card. This is for a victim's advocate. She can help you navigate the legal process and connect you with counseling services if you need them. After she left, I sat in my hotel room holding the card and trying to process the reality that I was now officially a victim. Not just of attempted murder, but of a betrayal so complete that it redefined every relationship I had ever trusted. I thought about Rosa's note and realized that she had given me something precious, proof that loyalty and love still existed in the world. She had risked her job, her safety, and her freedom to protect someone who had been kind to her. In a world where my own son had tried to kill me for money, Rosa had been willing to sacrifice everything just to save my life. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Jonathan Blackwood, Carlton's attorney. I was hoping we could meet and discuss this situation before it gets out of hand. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not sure what there is to discuss. Your client tried to murder me. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you're upset, but I think you've been given some inaccurate information about my client's involvement in what happened to your daughter-in-law. Carlton loves you very much, and he's devastated that you believe he could be capable of something like this. The smooth confidence in his voice made me want to hang up, but I forced myself to listen. What I'm proposing is a conversation. Just you, me, and Carlton. A chance for you to hear his side of the story before you make any final decisions about testifying against him. Mr. Blackwood, your client has already had several chances to tell me his side of the story. Every time he chose to lie to me. Family relationships are complicated, Mrs. Whitmore. Sometimes people make poor choices when they're desperate or scared. That doesn't make them murderers. No, Mr. Blackwood. But systematically poisoning someone for months while stealing their money and taking out life insurance policies on them, that makes them murderers. I hung up before he could respond, but I knew this was just the beginning. Carlton had hired the best defense attorney he could afford, which meant he was going to fight these charges with everything he had. The question was whether I had the strength to fight back. 3 weeks after Carlton's arrest, I sat in District Attorney Margaret Sullivan's office, listening to my son's voice plotting my death. The recordings Rosa had made were playing through a small speaker on Sullivan's desk, and each word felt like a physical blow. The old woman is getting suspicious, Carlton's voice said clearly through the static. Rosa keeps watching Ever in the kitchen, and Mom asked me yesterday if I thought her coffee tasted different. Ever's laugh came through the speaker, light and musical, as if they were discussing the weather instead of murder. Don't worry, baby. We're almost done. Another week, maybe 2 at most, and she'll be too weak to question anything. Then we give her the final dose and it looks like her heart just gave out from all the stress. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't block out the sound of my daughter-in-law's voice discussing my death with such casual indifference. "Are you sure the arsenic won't show up in an autopsy?" Carlton asked. "Only if they're specifically looking for it, and why would they? She's 64, she's been under stress running the company, and she's had health problems lately. It'll look completely natural." District Attorney Sullivan paused the recording and looked at me with sympathy. "Mrs. Whitmore, I know this is difficult to hear, but it's crucial evidence. This recording was made 6 days before the incident with the coffee." I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Rosa had been wearing a wire for over a month, documenting conversations she overheard while cleaning the house or serving meals during family gatherings. The woman I had dismissed as a simple housekeeper had been conducting her own investigation with the precision of a trained detective. "There's more," Sullivan said gently. Rosa recorded a total of 8 conversations between Carlton and Ever discussing the poisoning. She also documented their discussions about your will, the life insurance policies, and their plans for the company after your death. She started another recording, this one from 2 weeks before the coffee incident. "I can't wait to get rid of that stupid old woman." Ever's voice was sharp with irritation. "Do you know she questioned me today about the quarterly reports? Like I would steal from the company." "Which is funny," Carlton replied, "considering we've already moved over $300,000 out of the operating accounts." $300,000. More than Rosa had initially calculated. They had been systematically looting my company while slowly killing me. "Once she's gone, we can streamline everything," Carlton continued. "Fire half the staff, move operations overseas, sell off the real estate. That business is worth more in pieces than it is as a going concern." "And Rosa goes first thing," Ever added. "I hate the way she looks at me like she knows something. Plus, she's too expensive for what she does." "Rosa saved my life," I said quietly to Sullivan, "and they were planning to fire her the moment I was dead." Sullivan nodded. "Mrs. Whitmore, what you need to understand is that Carlton and Ever weren't just planning to kill you. They were planning to dismantle everything you built. Your employees would have lost their jobs, your business relationships would have been destroyed, and your charitable commitments would have been abandoned." She played another recording, this one from just 3 days before the incident. "I'm getting tired of waiting." Ever's voice was petulant, like a child denied a toy. "Can't we just give her a bigger dose and get this over with?" "We have to be careful," Carlton replied. "If we move too fast, it might raise suspicions. Besides, I'm enjoying watching her get weaker. She used to be so controlling, always telling me how to run things. Now she can barely make it through a board meeting without getting dizzy." The cruelty in his voice was worse than the criminal intent. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. Carlton had genuinely enjoyed watching me suffer. "I keep thinking about the will reading," Ever continued. "When that lawyer reads out that everything goes to you, and there's nothing for Rosa, nothing for any of those employees who think they're so loyal, I wish I could see their faces. Don't worry, baby. We'll have plenty of time to enjoy it. 40 years of marriage, maybe 50. We'll be rich for the rest of our lives." Sullivan stopped the recording. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something else you need to know about this last conversation. Rosa wasn't the only person who heard it." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Your security system at home includes audio recording in the main living areas. We obtained a warrant for those recordings, and we found that several of the conversations Rosa documented were also captured by your home security system." I had no idea the system recorded audio. Most people don't. The installer probably mentioned it when it was set up, but it's not something homeowners typically think about. However, it means we have independent verification of Rosa's recordings. Carlton's defense team can't claim she fabricated the evidence. Sullivan pulled out another folder. "There's also this. We found a detailed timeline in Ever's handwriting, documenting the progression of your poisoning and the expected timeline for your death. She handed me a photocopy of a handwritten document. In Ever's neat script, I saw a medical chart tracking my declining health over 3 months. Week 1-2, fatigue, mild nausea. Week 3-4, increased weakness, digestive issues. Week 5-6, confusion, dizziness, weight loss. The document continued for 12 weeks, ending with final dose, cardiac event expected within 24 to 48 hours. She was tracking my symptoms like a laboratory experiment, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore, Ever has a background in chemistry. She worked for a pharmaceutical company before she married your son. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she documented it because she wanted to perfect the method for potential future use. The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Future use? We believe that if this had succeeded, Carlton and Ever might have targeted other elderly family members or business associates. Ever's computer contained research on several other people in your social circle, including their health histories and financial situations. The scope of their planning was breathtaking in its callousness. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was the methodical work of people who had discovered they enjoyed causing suffering and wanted to perfect their technique. There's one more recording I need you to hear, Sullivan said. This one was made the morning of the incident, before Rosa intervened. She started the final audio file, and I heard Carlton and Ever in what sounded like a final planning session. You're sure about the dosage? Carlton asked. Absolutely. I calculated it based on her current level of toxicity. This amount will cause cardiac arrest within 2 hours. And you're sure it won't be traceable? By the time anyone thinks to test for arsenic, it'll be metabolized enough to look like natural causes. The coroner will see an elderly woman with recent health problems who died of heart failure. Case closed. What about Rosa? What about her? She's just the help. Fire her the next day, give her some story about downsizing. She'll be too busy looking for another job to ask questions. I love you, Ever. I love how smart you are, how you think of everything. I love you too, baby. After today, we'll never have to worry about money again. We'll never have to pretend to care about your boring mother and her precious little company. The recording ended, and the office fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I sat there staring at the speaker, trying to process the fact that my son had just told his wife he loved her for planning to murder me. Mrs. Whitmore, Sullivan said gently, I want you to know that with this evidence, we have an ironclad case. Even the best defense attorney in the country won't be able to explain away 8 recordings and written documentation of a murder plot. What kind of sentence are they looking at? With the premeditation evident in these recordings, the financial crimes, and the systematic nature of the poisoning, we're seeking life without the possibility of parole for both Carlton and Ever. Life without parole. My son would die in prison, and part of me felt like that was exactly what he deserved. But another part, the part that remembered the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, felt like something inside me was dying too. There's something else, Sullivan continued. Ever's attorney has approached us about a plea deal. She's willing to testify against Carlton in exchange for a reduced sentence. I looked up sharply. What kind of reduced sentence? 25 years instead of life. She would be eligible for parole when she's 58. And what would she testify about? According to her lawyer, Ever claims that the entire murder plot was Carlton's idea. She says he threatened to leave her if she didn't help him, and that he convinced her you were planning to cut him out of your will completely. The audacity of it took my breath away. Even facing life in prison, Ever was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you directly. Is there any truth to the claim that you were planning to disinherit Carlton? Absolutely not. My will has remained unchanged since my husband's death 15 years ago. Carlton inherits everything, including the business and all personal assets. There was never any discussion of changing that arrangement. So Ever's claim that Carlton felt threatened about his inheritance is false? Completely false. If anything, I had been discussing ways to transition more control of the company to Carlton over the next few years. He knew he was my sole heir. Sullivan made notes on her legal pad. That's what we expected, but we needed to hear it from you directly. Ever's plea offer is contingent on her testimony being credible, but if she's lying about Carlton's motivation, her deal falls apart. Are you going to accept her offer? That depends partly on you. As the victim, your input is important to our decision. However, I should tell you that even without Ever's testimony, we have enough evidence to convict both of them. I thought about the woman who had smiled at me while poisoning my coffee, who had tracked my declining health like a scientist documenting an experiment, who had laughed about my impending death with my own son. I don't want her to get a reduced sentence, I said firmly. Ever was not a victim of Carlton's manipulation. She was an equal partner in attempted murder, and she should face the full consequences of that choice. Sullivan nodded. I'll inform her attorney that the plea offer is rejected. As I prepared to leave the district attorney's office, Sullivan handed me one final document. This is a victim impact statement form. When this goes to trial, you'll have the opportunity to address the court and explain how these crimes have affected your life. I took the form, thinking about what I would say to a room full of strangers about the betrayal that had nearly cost me everything. How do you explain the feeling of discovering that your own child values your money more than your life? How do you articulate the loss of faith in every relationship you've ever trusted? That evening, I sat in my hotel room with Rosa, who had come to update me on the status of the house and the business. She looked older than her 52 years, worn down by the stress of the past few weeks, and the knowledge that she had been living in the middle of a murder plot. Mrs. Whitmore, Rosa said quietly, I need to tell you something. When I was recording Mr. Carlton and Mrs. Ever, I heard them talk about other things too. Things about you. What kind of things? Rosa hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to share. They used to make fun of you. They would laugh about how easy it was to fool you, how you believed everything they told you about caring for you and wanting to help with the business. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to listen. Mr. Carlton used to do impressions of you, the way you talk in business meetings, the way you worry about the employees. Mrs. Ever would laugh and say you were pathetic, that you were so desperate for their love that you would believe anything. The cruelty of it was almost worse than the murder plot. They hadn't just wanted me dead. They had actively despised me while pretending to love me. Rosa, why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I thought it would hurt you too much. And because I was afraid that if you knew how much they hated you, you might not fight back when the time came. But she was wrong about that. Knowing the depth of their contempt didn't make me want to give up. It made me want to fight even harder. Mrs. Whitmore, Rosa continued, there's something else. The police asked me to keep working at the house while they finished their investigation. They wanted me to document anything else I found. Yesterday, I discovered something in Mr. Carlton's office. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed Carlton and Ever at what looked like an expensive restaurant, raising champagne glasses in a toast. They were both smiling broadly, looking happier than I had ever seen them. I found this in a frame on his desk, Rosa said. When I looked at the date stamp, it was taken the day after your last doctor's appointment, when you told them you were feeling weak and dizzy. They had been celebrating my deteriorating health. While I was worried about my symptoms and considering medical tests, Carlton and Ever had gone out for champagne to toast the success of their murder plot. Rosa, I said, studying the photograph, I want you to give this to Detective Chen. I want the jury to see exactly how Carlton and Ever felt about slowly killing me. She nodded and put the photograph back in her purse. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you something. When this is all over, when the trial is finished and they're in prison, what are you going to do? It was a question I had been avoiding because I didn't know the answer. My entire life had been built around relationships and institutions that no longer existed. My son was gone, not just to prison, but to a moral darkness I couldn't comprehend. My company would need to be rebuilt from the financial damage Carlton and Ever had inflicted. My house would forever be the place where someone tried to murder me. I honestly don't know, I admitted. Everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a lie. I need to figure out how to build something new. Rosa reached across the table and took my hand. Mrs. Whitmore, for 20 years you treated me with kindness and respect. You helped my family when we needed it, and you never made me feel like I was just the help. Whatever you decide to do next, I hope you know that you have people who care about you. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of something that wasn't grief or rage or fear. It was hope. Not hope that my old life could be restored, but hope that a new life, built on truth and genuine relationships, might be possible. The recordings had shown me the worst of human nature, the capacity for cruelty and betrayal that I never wanted to believe existed. But Rosa had shown me something else, the capacity for loyalty, courage, and love that asks for nothing in return. As I prepared for the trial that would determine Carlton and Ever's fate, I realized that their greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating Rosa or overestimating their own cleverness. Their greatest mistake was believing that destroying my faith in them would destroy my faith in everything. They were wrong about that, just as they had been wrong about everything else. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of Suffolk County Superior Court, watching my son being led into the courtroom in shackles. Carlton had lost weight during his time in jail, and his expensive suits had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance. Ever entered separately, her blonde hair pulled back severely and her face pale without makeup. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, never once looking in my direction. The woman who had smiled while poisoning my coffee for months couldn't even meet my gaze now that she faced the consequences of her actions. The trial had drawn significant media attention. Mother targeted for murder by son and daughter-in-law was the kind of story that fascinated and horrified people in equal measure. I had declined all interview requests, but the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and a few employees from my company who had come to show their support. District Attorney Sullivan had warned me that defense attorney Jonathan Blackwood would try to paint Carlton as a victim of Ever's manipulation, despite the recordings that clearly showed both of them planning my murder with equal enthusiasm. What she hadn't prepared me for was how painful it would be to listen to Carlton's lies about our relationship. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Blackwood began his opening statement, "this is a case about a troubled young man who fell under the influence of a manipulative woman with a background in chemistry and a talent for psychological control." I watched Carlton's face as his lawyer portrayed him as weak and easily influenced. There was no shame there, no recognition that he was allowing another person to take responsibility for his choices. The man sitting at the defense table bore no resemblance to the son I had raised. Ever Whitmore preyed on Carlton's insecurities about his inheritance, Blackwood continued. She convinced him that his mother was planning to disinherit him, that the only way to secure their future was to take desperate action. Prosecutor Sullivan objected immediately. "Your Honor, there's no evidence that Mrs. Whitmore ever planned to change her will or disinherit the defendant." "Sustained," Judge Harrison ruled. "The jury will disregard that last statement," but I knew the damage was done. Blackwood was planting seeds of doubt about my relationship with Carlton, suggesting that I had somehow driven him to attempted murder through my own actions. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Detective Chen testified about the evidence found in Carlton and Ever's home and offices. The medical examiner explained how arsenic poisoning works and how close I had come to death. Rosa took the stand and walked the jury through months of observations, her quiet dignity making her testimony even more powerful. When the recordings were played in court, the room fell completely silent. Hearing Carlton and Ever discuss my murder in their own voices, laughing about my suffering and planning their celebration of my death, created an atmosphere of shock that even Blackwood couldn't dispel. "I love how smart you are, how you think of everything." Carlton's voice echoed through the courtroom as he praised Ever for calculating the fatal dose of arsenic. I watched the jury's faces as they listened. Several jurors looked physically sick. One woman in the front row was crying. Whatever sympathy Blackwood hoped to generate for Carlton was evaporating with each cruel word. The most damaging evidence came from Ever's own documentation. Prosecutor Sullivan displayed enlarged copies of Ever's handwritten timeline, showing the jury exactly how she had tracked my declining health week by week, planning my death like a scientific experiment. "The defendant didn't just plan to kill Mrs. Whitmore," Sullivan told the jury. "She enjoyed watching her suffer. She documented every symptom, every sign of weakness, as if she were conducting a research study on the best way to murder someone." When it came time for the defense to present their case, Blackwood called several character witnesses who testified about Carlton's good reputation before his marriage. His college roommate, a former business partner, even our family pastor spoke about the Carlton they had known. But their testimony felt hollow against the weight of the evidence. It didn't matter what kind of person Carlton had been before Ever, if he had become someone capable of slowly poisoning his own mother. Blackwood's strategy became clear when he called Dr. Patricia Vance, a psychiatrist who specialized in psychological manipulation and coercive control. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Vance testified, "Carlton Whitmore exhibits all the classic signs of someone who was psychologically manipulated by a skilled predator. Ever Whitmore used her knowledge of chemistry and psychology to create a situation where Carlton felt he had no choice but to participate in her plan." Prosecutor Sullivan's cross-examination was brutal. "Dr. Vance, you've testified that Carlton was coerced into participating in this murder plot. Can you explain to the jury how someone could be coerced into stealing $300,000 from his mother's business accounts?" "Well, financial crimes often accompany other forms of abuse." "Dr. Vance, have you listened to the recordings where Carlton expresses joy at watching his mother suffer? Where he tells Ever he loves how smart she is for planning the perfect murder?" Victims of psychological manipulation often adopt the language and attitudes of their abusers as a survival mechanism. So when Carlton laughed about his mother's death and said he couldn't wait to inherit her money, he was really expressing trauma? Dr. Vance hesitated. It's possible." Even Blackwood looked uncomfortable with how his expert witness was being dismantled. The idea that Carlton was purely a victim of Ever's manipulation was impossible to maintain when confronted with his own words expressing genuine enthusiasm for my murder. The prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. Sullivan called Dr. Michael Torres, a forensic psychiatrist who had interviewed both Carlton and Ever. "Both defendants show clear signs of antisocial personality disorder," Dr. Torres testified. "They lack empathy, have a grandiose sense of entitlement, and show no genuine remorse for their actions. This wasn't a case of one person manipulating another. This was a partnership between two individuals who discovered they shared a willingness to commit murder for financial gain." When it came time for victim impact statements, I had debated whether to speak at all. What could I say that would adequately express the devastation of discovering that your own child wants you dead? How do you explain the feeling of having your entire life revealed as a lie? But as I walked to the podium and looked out at the crowded courtroom, I realized that my words weren't really for Carlton or Ever. They were for the jury, for the reporters who would write about this case, for anyone who might someday find themselves wondering if they could trust the people closest to them. "My name is Evelyn Whitmore," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "Carlton is my only child. For 39 years, I believed that meant something. I believed that no matter what happened in the world, we would always have each other." I paused, looking directly at Carlton for the first time since the trial began. He was staring at the table in front of him, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. For months, Carlton and Ever slowly poisoned me while I trusted them completely. They stole from my business while I included them in important decisions. They took out life insurance policies on me while I planned for their future inheritance. They laughed about my suffering while I worried about my declining health. My voice grew stronger as I continued. But the worst part wasn't the physical poisoning. The worst part was the emotional poisoning. Every kind word, every expression of concern, every moment of apparent affection was a lie designed to keep me vulnerable while they planned my death. I saw several jurors wipe away tears, but I also saw Carlton finally look up at me. For just a moment, I thought I glimpsed something that might have been remorse in his eyes. Carlton once promised to take care of me after his father died. Instead, he chose to betray every value I tried to teach him, every lesson about love and loyalty and family. He didn't just try to kill my body. He killed my faith in the possibility of unconditional love. I paused, gathering myself for the final part of my statement. I survived their murder plot thanks to a woman named Rosa Martinez, who risked everything to save my life. Rosa showed me that love and loyalty still exist in this world, even when they come from unexpected places. Carlton and Ever tried to destroy my life, but Rosa's courage reminded me that there are still people worth trusting, still relationships worth building. I looked directly at Carlton one last time. I forgive you, because carrying hatred would poison me more surely than any arsenic. But I will never trust you again. And I will never pretend that what you did was anything less than pure evil. As I returned to my seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the peace of having my old life restored, but the peace of having finally spoken the truth about what had been done to me. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered verdicts that would change everything. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Carlton Whitmore guilty. Carlton's shoulders sagged, but he showed no other emotion. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Carlton Whitmore guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant Carlton Whitmore guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant Carlton Whitmore guilty. The verdicts for Ever were identical. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following week, but the outcome was predetermined. With the premeditation clearly established and the financial motive proven, both Carlton and Ever faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the courtroom emptied, I remained in my seat, trying to process the finality of what had just happened. Carlton would die in prison. The little boy who used to bring me dandelions was gone forever, replaced by someone I would never understand. Rosa appeared beside me, her face showing the relief of someone who had carried a terrible burden for too long. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "it's over." "Yes," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I meant the trial or something larger. "It's over." As we walked out of the courthouse together, past the reporters and cameras and curious onlookers, I realized that while one chapter of my life had ended in the most painful way possible, another chapter was beginning. The question now was what I would choose to do with whatever time I had left. A week later, Judge Harrison sentenced both Carlton and Ever to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I had heard enough of their voices, seen enough of their faces, given enough of my emotional energy to their crimes. Instead, I spent that day with Rosa, going through the house one final time before putting it on the market. Every room held memories that had been poisoned by knowledge, and I knew I could never live there again. In Carlton's childhood bedroom, I found a photo album filled with pictures from happier times. Birthday parties, family vacations, holidays when we all seemed to love each other genuinely. I stared at those images, trying to reconcile the smiling child in the photographs with the man who had been sentenced to die in prison. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rosa said from the doorway. "Are you all right?" I closed the album and set it aside. I was just trying to figure out when it all went wrong. When Carlton stopped being the child I raised and became someone who could plan my murder. "Maybe it doesn't matter when it happened," Rosa said gently. "Maybe what matters is what you do now." She was right. I could spend the rest of my life trying to understand how love had turned to hatred, how family had become betrayal. Or I could choose to focus on the love and loyalty that still existed in the world, the kind of relationship Rosa had shown me was possible. That evening, I made 2 phone calls that would reshape my future. The first was to my attorney, instructing him to establish a charitable foundation in Rosa's honor, dedicated to protecting elderly people from financial and physical abuse by family members. The second was to Rosa herself. "Rosa," I said when she answered, "I have a proposition for you. I'm starting a new chapter of my life, and I'd like you to be part of it. Not as my housekeeper, but as my partner." There was silence on the other end of the line, then Rosa's voice, thick with emotion. "Mrs. Whitmore, I would be honored." 6 months after Carlton and Ever's conviction, the Whitmore Foundation opened its doors with Rosa as executive director and me as chairman of the board. We worked with law enforcement, social services, and medical professionals to identify and investigate cases of elder abuse. Our first case came from a nurse who noticed that an elderly patient's health declined dramatically after family visits. Our second came from a bank teller who was concerned about large withdrawals from an elderly customer's account. Our third came from a neighbor who heard screaming from the house next door. Each case reminded me that Carlton and Ever weren't unique. They were part of a larger pattern of people who preyed on vulnerability and trust, who used love as a weapon to justify unspeakable cruelty. But each case we helped also reminded me that Rosa wasn't unique either. There were people everywhere who were willing to stand up for what was right, even when it cost them something. The foundation became my new purpose, my new family. Not the biological family that had tried to destroy me, but the chosen family of people who shared my commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. I never saw Carlton again. He wrote letters from prison, but I returned them unopened. There was nothing he could say that would change what he had done, no explanation that would restore the trust he had shattered. Ever died in prison 3 years after her conviction, killed by another inmate in a dispute over contraband cigarettes. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Not satisfaction, not grief. Just the dull recognition that someone who had caused great pain was no longer capable of causing more. Carlton remained in prison, and as far as I knew, he would stay there until he died. Sometimes I wondered if he ever thought about the family he had destroyed, the mother he had tried to murder, the life he had thrown away for money he would never live to spend. But mostly, I tried not to think about him at all. The foundation grew, expanding to serve elderly victims across New England. Rosa proved to be a brilliant administrator, her quiet competence and genuine compassion making her beloved by staff and clients alike. On the 5th anniversary of the foundation's opening, we held a celebration dinner for our supporters and volunteers. As I looked around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated themselves to protecting the vulnerable, I realized something profound. Carlton and Ever had tried to poison my faith in human nature, just as they had poisoned my coffee. But they had failed. Their evil had been answered by Rosa's courage, their betrayal balanced by the loyalty of strangers who became friends, their hatred overwhelmed by a community of people committed to love in action. The coffee they prepared for me had been meant to be my last. Instead, it had become the beginning of a new life built on truth, justice, and the kind of family that chooses each other rather than simply sharing blood. As I raised my glass to toast the work we were doing, I thought about the morning Rosa had whispered, "Don't drink, just trust me." She had saved more than my life that day. She had saved my faith in the possibility of goodness. And that, I realized, was worth more than any inheritance. 10 years have passed since that October morning when Rosa saved my life with a whispered warning and a spilled cup of coffee. I am 74 now, and as I sit in my garden watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I can honestly say that these have been the most meaningful years of my life. The house where Carlton tried to murder me was sold within months of his conviction. I couldn't bear to live with those memories, couldn't walk through rooms where my own son had plotted my death. Instead, Rosa and I found a beautiful colonial in Wellesley, far enough from Boston to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to continue our work with the foundation. Rosa lives in the guest house on the property, though the distinction between guest and family disappeared long ago. She is 72 now, her hair completely silver, but her eyes still sharp with the intelligence that saved both our lives. We share morning coffee each day, a ritual that began as necessity, but became the anchor of a relationship deeper than blood. The Whitmore Foundation has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a way to channel my grief into purpose has become a nationally recognized organization with offices in 12 states. We've helped prosecute over 300 cases of elder abuse, recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets, and created support networks for victims who thought they had nowhere to turn. Rosa serves as our national director now, though she jokes that she's the only executive director in America who still insists on doing her own grocery shopping and refuses to hire a housekeeper. "I know what happens when you trust the wrong people," she says with a smile that has never lost its warmth despite everything she's seen. Our work has brought us into contact with heartbreak on a daily basis. Adult children who drain their parents' bank accounts, caregivers who steal medications and sell them on the street, family members who isolate elderly relatives from friends and social services while systematically abusing them. But it has also shown us the incredible resilience of the human spirit. I've met 90-year-old women who started over after losing everything to family fraud. I've watched 80-year-old men testify against their own children with dignity and courage that humbled everyone in the courtroom. I've seen people who had every reason to become bitter and suspicious instead choose to remain open to love and connection. 3 years ago, we opened the Rosa Martinez Crisis Center, a residential facility for elderly victims of abuse who need safe housing while their cases are investigated. Rosa cried when we unveiled the sign bearing her name, insisting that she didn't deserve such recognition. "Rosa," I told her that day, "you saved my life when you had every reason to stay silent. You risked everything to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. If that doesn't deserve recognition, I don't know what does." The center has become a model for other cities, a place where victims can heal while receiving the legal and emotional support they need to rebuild their lives. Many of our residents are in their 70s and 80s, starting over after decades of abuse they never reported, because they couldn't bear the shame of admitting their own children were stealing from them. I spend 2 days a week at the center, leading support groups and helping new residents navigate the legal system. It's difficult work, listening to stories that mirror my own experience of betrayal and manipulation. But it's also healing work, finding meaning in suffering by using it to help others. Last month, we helped a 78-year-old woman named Margaret, whose son had been forging her signature on checks for over a year. When she discovered the theft and confronted him, he convinced her she was developing dementia and couldn't trust her own memory. She lived in confusion and self-doubt for months before a bank teller noticed irregularities and called our hotline. "I thought I was losing my mind," Margaret told me during her first week at the center. My own son kept telling me I was imagining things, that I was paranoid. I started to believe him. "That's what abusers do," I replied, thinking of the way Carlton had dismissed my concerns about my health while he and Ever slowly poisoned me. "They make you doubt your own perceptions so you won't trust what you're seeing." Margaret's son was eventually prosecuted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. She recovered most of her stolen money and, more importantly, her faith in her own judgment. 6 months later, she became a volunteer at the center, helping other victims recognize the signs of financial abuse. "I want to make sure no one else goes through what I went through," she said. "I want them to know they're not crazy, they're not imagining things, and they're not alone." That phrase has become our unofficial motto: "You're not alone." Because isolation is the weapon that abusers use most effectively. They cut their victims off from friends, family members who might ask questions, professionals who might notice problems. They create a world where the victim has no one to turn to except the person who is hurting them. The foundation has also become personal in ways I never expected. Rosa and I have been invited to speak at conferences, to share our story with law enforcement officers, social workers, and medical professionals who might encounter elder abuse in their work. The first time I told our story to a room full of strangers, I was terrified. How do you explain that your own son tried to murder you without sounding like you're seeking pity? How do you describe the betrayal without making people uncomfortable about their own family relationships? But I learned that people need to hear these stories. They need to understand that elder abuse doesn't just happen in nursing homes or to people who have no family. It happens in beautiful houses in expensive neighborhoods. It's perpetrated by people with college degrees and professional careers. It's hidden behind smiles and expressions of concern. After one of our presentations, a nurse approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "I've been worried about one of my patients for months. Her daughter brings her to appointments, but something about their interactions felt wrong. The patient seemed scared of her own daughter, but I couldn't put my finger on why. After hearing your story, I think I know what I'm seeing." That nurse's instincts led to an investigation that revealed the daughter had been stealing her mother's Social Security payments and threatening to put her in a nursing home if she told anyone. The mother was moved to safety, and the daughter was prosecuted. One presentation led to one nurse trusting her instincts, which led to one victim being saved. That's how change happens, one person at a time, one moment of courage building on another. The foundation has also brought unexpected relationships into my life. Dr. Sarah Chen, the detective who investigated Carlton's crimes, became a close friend and now serves on our board of directors. She retired from the police force 5 years ago and works with us full-time, training law enforcement officers to recognize and investigate elder abuse. "Your case changed how I approach these investigations," she told me recently. "Before, I might have assumed that family members were innocent until proven guilty. Now I know that sometimes the people who seem most concerned are the ones causing the harm." We've also developed relationships with prosecutors, judges, and victim advocates across the country. The network of people committed to protecting elderly victims has grown exponentially, and I'm proud that our foundation helped create connections between professionals who might otherwise work in isolation. But perhaps the most unexpected development has been my relationship with other family members who were never part of Carlton's world. Charles's sister Margaret reached out to me 5 years ago, saying she had been following the foundation's work and wanted to reconnect. "I lost touch with you after Charles died," she admitted over lunch at a restaurant near her home in Vermont. "I was dealing with my own grief, and Carlton seemed so protective of you. I assumed you wanted space to heal as a family." Margaret is 81 now, a retired teacher with grandchildren who adore her. She had no idea what Carlton and Ever were planning, no knowledge of the systematic abuse I endured. When she learned the truth, she was horrified and heartbroken. "I keep thinking about all those years we could have stayed in touch," she said. "If I had been around more, maybe I would have noticed something was wrong. Maybe I could have helped." "Margaret," I told her, "Carlton and Ever were experts at hiding what they were doing. They fooled me for months, and I was living with them. Please don't blame yourself for not seeing something they worked very hard to conceal." Margaret now volunteers with the foundation and has become one of my closest friends. She represents the family connection I thought I had lost forever, the continuation of my relationship with Charles through someone who loved him too. Her presence in my life has been healing in ways I didn't expect. When she tells stories about Charles as a young man, or when she shares memories of family gatherings from decades ago, she helps me remember that not all family relationships are built on manipulation and lies. "Charles would be so proud of what you've built," she told me recently as we walked through the foundation's headquarters. He always said you had a gift for turning pain into purpose. I think about Charles often, especially when I'm struggling with difficult cases or feeling overwhelmed by the scope of elder abuse in our society. I wonder what he would think about Carlton's crimes, whether he would be angry or heartbroken or both. I wonder if he would understand my decision to cut Carlton out of my life completely, or if he would urge me to maintain some connection despite everything. But mostly, I think Charles would be proud that I chose to build something positive from the ashes of our family's destruction. He would appreciate that Rosa and I have created a new kind of family, one based on choice and shared values rather than biological connections. Carlton is still in prison, serving his life sentence without possibility of parole. He continued writing letters for several years after his conviction, but I returned them all unopened. Eventually, the letters stopped coming. I don't know if he gave up hope of reconciliation or if something happened to him in prison. I've chosen not to find out. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about cutting off all contact with my only child. The question used to bother me, but I've learned to answer it honestly. I feel no guilt about protecting myself from someone who tried to murder me. He's still your son, a well-meaning friend said once. Don't you think you owe him forgiveness? I forgave Carlton years ago, I replied. Forgiveness means I don't carry hatred or resentment. But forgiveness doesn't require me to maintain a relationship with someone who systematically abused me. I can forgive him and still choose not to have him in my life. The distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation is one I've had to explain many times, both to myself and others. Forgiveness is something you do for your own peace of mind. Reconciliation is something that requires genuine remorse and changed behavior from the person who caused harm. Carlton has never shown genuine remorse. Even his letters, the few I glimpsed before returning them, were focused on his own suffering rather than the pain he caused. He wrote about the conditions in prison, about missing his old life, about feeling betrayed by Ever's plea negotiations. He never wrote about understanding why what he did was wrong, or about recognizing the devastation he caused. I learned early in my recovery that I could forgive Carlton without trusting him, that I could let go of anger without letting him back into my life. The Foundation's work has reinforced this understanding. I've met dozens of elderly victims who felt obligated to maintain relationships with abusive family members because family is family. Family is what you make it, I tell them. Biology creates connections, but love creates family. If someone consistently chooses to harm you rather than love you, they've made their own choice about what kind of relationship you have. This philosophy has guided my own choices about family. Rosa and I are family in every way that matters. Margaret and I are family through our shared love for Charles and our mutual choice to support each other. The staff and volunteers at the Foundation are family through our commitment to a common purpose. Carlton and I share DNA, but we are not family. He chose money over love, greed over loyalty, murder over mercy. Those choices severed our family bond more completely than any legal document could. As I've grown older, I've become more aware of my own mortality and more intentional about how I spend my remaining years. The Foundation is well established now, with a strong board of directors and excellent staff. Rosa and I have created succession plans that will ensure the work continues long after we're gone. I've also made peace with the reality that I will probably die without reconciling with Carlton. For a long time, that thought made me sad. Now, it makes me grateful. Grateful that I survived his murder attempt. Grateful that I had the opportunity to build a meaningful life after discovering the truth about his character. Grateful that my last years are filled with purpose and genuine relationships, rather than the toxic manipulation I endured for so long. Last week, we celebrated the Foundation's 10th anniversary with a gala dinner that raised over $2 million for our programs. As I looked around the room at the hundreds of people who had come together to support elder abuse victims, I felt a profound sense of completion. This is what I was meant to do with my life. Not just run a successful business or raise a successful child, but use my experience of betrayal and survival to help others navigate their own journeys from victimhood to empowerment. Rosa and I often talk about what would have happened if she hadn't been brave enough to spill that coffee, to whisper that warning, to document Carlton and Ever's crimes. I would be dead, certainly. But more than that, all the people we've helped through the foundation would still be trapped in abusive situations. One moment of courage, Rosa said recently, can change everything. She's right. Her moment of courage saved my life, but it also created ripples that have spread far beyond either of us could have imagined. Every victim we've helped represents another ripple, another life changed, another story of survival rather than destruction. This morning, as I finish my coffee and prepare for another day at the foundation, I think about the woman I was 10 years ago. Naive, trusting, desperate for family connection even when that connection was poisoning me. That woman couldn't have imagined the life I live now, the satisfaction of work that matters, the peace of relationships based on truth and choice rather than obligation and manipulation. Carlton tried to steal my life for money he would never live to enjoy. Instead, he gave me the gift of clarity about what really matters. Not blood relations or inherited wealth, but the courage to stand up for justice and the wisdom to recognize love when it appears in unexpected forms. The coffee that was meant to kill me became the catalyst for the most meaningful chapter of my life. Every morning when Rosa and I share our breakfast, every day when we help another victim find safety and justice, every moment when we choose love over hatred and hope over despair, I am drinking from a cup that represents survival, purpose, and the triumph of good people over evil intentions. At 74, I am more alive than I was at 64. At 74, I know who I can trust and why trust is worth the risk. At 74, I understand that family is not about blood or obligation, but about people who choose to protect and cherish each other. The sun is fully up now, painting my garden in brilliant morning light. Rosa will arrive soon for our daily coffee, and we'll spend another day working to make the world a little safer for people who deserve protection and love. I am Evelyn Whitmore, survivor of attempted murder, founder of a movement, and mother to a family I chose rather than inherited. This is not the life I planned, but it is exactly the life I was meant to live. And every day, with every cup of coffee shared in love rather than deception, I celebrate the simple miracle of being alive. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.